You're listening to The Sound of Pursuit, coming to you live from PI Education's world headquarters right here in Nashville, Tennessee. And I got to say, we are pretty tickled to have you here today. I've got my co-host, John Nardizzi, with me. John, welcome. It's a beautiful day here in Nashville. How are things up there in the Boston area?
Things are beautiful and snowy today. Nice. Gorgeous out there.
I love it. We've got this nice sunshine going on here today, and the temperature is kind of perfect for being outside. But here we are in our studios doing our thing. The Sound of Pursuit is brought to you by PI Education. Again, this is from the world headquarters right here in Nashville, Tennessee. John and I have talked about topics that we're going to talk about in the podcast in the next several weeks. We decided this week there's a lot of interest out there from people writing to us here at PI Education. I know my fellow private investigators, John included, get requests all the time from people that would like to get into this business. John, one of the questions I get almost all the time is, hey, do you have to be a retired cop to be a private investigator?
That is the most common question I get as well. And I think you and I both know that is, it's a stereotype that exists. Many former cops do enter this business, but it's far from being the only area. And I'd say at this point, that's actually probably in many ways a declining source of people.
I think it is. And here's the thing. I've got some private investigator friends that used to be police officers that are fantastic private investigators. I don't want to take anything away from the work they do because they do fantastic work. And there is some argument that if you're going to do criminal defense work and murder investigations and stuff like that, there's an argument that having, a career's worth of experience in investigating those kind of cases for prosecution can be really helpful for working on defense cases. But I think also it's very much possible for someone who is not a police officer, who has never been in law enforcement, to come into criminal defense work and get their head around it.
Absolutely. And that's actually how I came into this business. I was a law student at the University of California, Hastings. And I went to a conference one morning that was really transformative. I mean, I remember that morning so well. There were different speakers talking about things that they had done with a law degree. I think there was a former DA was up there. There was somebody else who started a business. And there was this kind of bull-like guy, a third speaker, who turned out to be a guy named Jack Palladino, who had a firm, Palladino in Sutherland, who did sort of groundbreaking civil and criminal work. And when he described the work, a light went off in my head. I said, this is the best combo of my interests, which are writing, researching, investigations. This is it. And so I sort of turned my back on a law career. I still finished law school. It was my third year, so I certainly wasn't going to drop out of law school or anything like that. But I started working for him, and a lot of my classmates were completely baffled. I would tell them, I say, hey, I gotta go out to this bar. I have an expense account. I gotta sit at this bar and talk to these people at this place tonight. And they're like, what are you doing? So how did you break into this profession?
When in talking about today's podcast, and this is going to be a relatively brief podcast, but we discussed the idea of origin stories, and you just heard John's, and it's an interesting story for a number of reasons, because when faced with the choice of what to do with your life, a lot of people going through law school would say, I've got so much invested in this, I've got so much time in this, and I can make so much more money being an attorney, that would be just a no-brainer choice. I'm really intrigued the thought process that you went through.
Yeah, that was some of the questions that people had, like, are you going to make good money? And first off, I think that it's a little bit of a misconception that all lawyers make more money than all investigators. I think when you actually talk to people that run PI firms, you'd be pretty surprised at some of the income levels of some of these firms. But for me, it was just passion, love. I mean, I could just tell this was what I was meant to do. I mean, the way he described it was, you're going to be. It was primarily an interview-heavy, litigation-focused firm, and we traveled around the country, talking to witnesses and doing research and records research. I can see your eyes lighting up, Hal, in terms of the notion of records research,
You
real
know,
estate records.
it's just the ability to go through courthouse records, paw through actual paper documents down in the musty basement of a courthouse. A lot of people don't have that experience, and it's fun. I get a kick out of it.
Exactly.
It does kind of light my fire a little bit. You asked about my origin story. So for a lot of people that follow us on YouTube, when you log in, when you click over to the PI Education YouTube channel, one of the first things that comes up is a video called Origin Stories, and it's my story. And the bottom line is, my father was a real estate appraiser. I grew up measuring houses. I held the dumb end of the tape for years for my dad, and learned how to appraise real estate. I also grew up on a farm. I grew up a farm boy in rural West Tennessee. There were a couple things that happened to me when I was a kid that really had an impact on, kind of how I move forward in life. One is Rockford. My
Yeah.
grandmother, before I should have been watching Rockford, my grandmother was making me Folgers Crystals coffee at 7:30 in the evening to sit down with her and watch Jim Rockford. She loved that show, and I grew
love
to
it.
love it.
Love it.
And then when I got into junior high school, Magnum PI came on, and I got sucked
Yep.
into that and loved it. And
Me too. That was a big show for me.
I remember when I was a kid, I told my dad, I said, one of these days I'm going to have a red Ferrari, and I'm going to have my own PI agency, and I'm going to be a big man about Humboldt. Well, I don't have a Ferrari. I don't live in Humboldt. I don't live in a trailer by the sea like Jim Rockford, but I am a private investigator. And the path I took was not a direct line. I went through university, got a degree, started working as a real estate appraiser, spent 23 full years working as a commercial real estate appraiser. And I had, how do you say it? Just a crisis of confidence. I don't know. I ran out of steam. I had a burnout as a real estate appraiser. We've got to have this report in by this date. We've got to have this done by 3:00. We got to have, it's like nonstop, like demands. So I picked something that has more demands.
Yeah, you certainly didn't move to an easygoing profession with no timelines or demand timelines.
But one of the things, I think it's useful for people that ask me about how do you become a private investigator, is I try to walk them through, whatever you've done in a previous career, whatever you've done in previous schooling, there are elements of that will probably be useful as a private investigator. If you have a real passion for this kind of work, and I hesitate to use the word passion, but I think you and I both feel pretty passionate about this work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You can take any number of past skills and use them in this work, whether you're doing surveillance work, personal injury work, medical malpractice work, plaintiff's work, criminal defense work, whatever area of private investigations you end up in that really like tickles all the right spots for you. There's a good chance that whatever experiences you have in your past can be useful.
Yeah, exactly. I think the personality types that are out there, and this reminds me of a show that I'm currently watching that it's not new, but it's fantastic. And maybe you've seen True Detective.
Oh, I'm totally loved it.
Yeah. The first season is incredible. And there's a line in one of the early episodes. I just watched it this weekend. I'm a little behind on my TV watching, as you could tell. But it talks about types of detectives, and it's the character of Marty, played by Woody Harrelson. He says about detectives, we all fit a certain category: the bully, the charmer, the surrogate dad, the man possessed by ungovernable rage, the brain. Any of these types could be a good detective, and any of these types can be an incompetent shitheel. I love it because it really, we've all seen these types, and we all know that these types exist in terms of guys and women that run agencies. And in reality, I think both those characters in True Detective, they don't really fall in one of those. They kind of morph between one or two or three, depending on the scene. I think that's why I love this job. Anybody can, if they have a passion for it, they can fit their personality, they can fit their interests, they can fit their skill set. It's really it's a phenomenal profession for anybody to consider.
It is. And, you and I have several mutual friends in this business. And I'm not going to name any names. I might, but I'm going to try not to. We have one common friend that does nothing but due diligence work up in New York. He's a great guy. And his personality is like, he's just inquisitive. He wants to dig and find the answer. Um,
Yeah.
Brian, we're talking about you. And then, our buddy Kelly out in Texas, Kelly Riddle, like that dude has been in this business for a long time. And the thing that impresses me about Kelly is he shares so much with this industry. He helps
Yeah.
other investigators. He brings people into the fold. He's great. But Kelly is like the surrogate dad, kind of. Like he's served as a mentor for me over the years in certain situations. And that personality type definitely works.
Absolutely.
I've worked with bully investigators, like just pit bulls. I don't like
Yeah.
that. It's not my thing.
Yep.
But anything can work, given the right circumstances. And like you said, they can all be incompetent shitheels if they're not careful.
Right. Right. And I think that that's the goal, really, for anybody. I think in any profession is to be the best that you can be. Strive to be really stand out with excellent work product. Don't settle for anything. And my early mentors when I was working for Palladino and Sutherland, some of my colleagues, they had really more experience than I did. I was just a law student. I had never uh, done any real professional interviews. What I had done was I was a writer, and I would wander around the city and I would talk to people, and then sort of write short stories and poems, and I was doing sort of that kind of thing. And I
Hmm.
remember Palladino sort of got a kick out of that. Them walking around the worst section of town, interviewing retired hitmen, writing poems about them. So it did morph into the job, but I had phenomenal colleagues that had real journalism experience, and I modeled a lot of what I do off of them. And the report style, literally still use the same report style that Palladino used, and he learned it from a guy named Hal Lipset. Anybody in this industry should look up Hal Lipset. He's a guy that literally started modern private investigations in a lot of ways on the West Coast, based in San Francisco in the 1950s. So there's a long lineage and a lot of people you can learn from, and a lot of books have been written by these folks as well.
Yeah. For folks out there that happen to tune in to the Sound of Pursuit podcast on a fairly regular basis, the point of today's discussion chat is to let you know if you are what we like to call here at Pursuit Magazine spy curious, if you're a person that is interested in becoming a private investigator, there are a number of things you can do to start moving into this field. And here's the thing: as career shifts go, moving into the field of private investigations, you might not get rich. You might not start off making much money at all, but you can get into the business. And for instance, if you have interest in being a criminal defense investigator, one of the things I tell people all the time is, if you get your PI license and you want to get into criminal defense work, talk to young attorneys that have just been put on the court appointed list for criminal cases. They need
Absolutely.
they need help.
Yep. That's exactly right. And that's unfortunately, I have to sometimes turn down a lot of those calls, much to their frustration. We're busy with the current workload, but you're right that's a classic way to do some real good work. You're going to get exposed to this business right away. There's not going to be any hand holding. You're going to get
Hmm.
actual cases. There'll probably be district court cases, assault and batteries, break and entering, those kinds of cases. And then you move on from there. You develop your skills. You learn how to do research. You learn how to do court research. You learn real estate records research. because we know that what's buried in those records is always gold. So
At the end of the day, paper is having a piece of paper with a piece of information on it that is verifiable from a government source is just a really good source of information. And it falls under the category of OSINT. It's open source. It's there for anybody to go pick up.
right, and we sometimes joke about this idea that OSINT is new. The term OSINT is new, but OSINT itself is not new. We've been doing it just in a different form. It typically was called public records research, and just because it's online, perhaps, or in a database, you're going to develop skills to get that stuff and also the old paper records that still exist.
Yeah. Let's take a second to do a little bit of identification. I'm Hal Humphreys. I am the, I think, managing editor of Pursuit magazine. You're listening to The Sound of Pursuit. If you want to find me on Twitter, you can use the @ @findpi. If you want to find Pursuit magazine on Twitter, you can find us at Pursuit Mag on Twitter. And then my co-host is John Nardizzi. John, tell us a little bit about you and how to find you.
I am a investigator and writer based in Boston. I am most active on Twitter at authorpi, with various links there to other sites.
John, one of the things I get asked a lot, when you're at a party and you're talking to somebody, say, "Oh my gosh, I'd be a great private investigator." I never tell them they wouldn't, because there's a very good chance they might be. But sometimes people ask me, what professions make for the best private investigators? And like we said at the very beginning, a lot of people think ex-cops are great private investigators, and they can be. But one of my favorite sources of fresh, smart, talented investigators is journalism.
Yeah, I agree. That mimics sort of the background of some of the best people in this business that I've encountered and worked with and learned from. And when I see somebody send a resume with that kind of background, investigative reporting, to me, it tells me a couple things. Number one, they know the basics of having a professional curiosity about things. Not that you hold every bit of information in your brain, but it's more about, how can I find this out? What's the method to discovering the answer to this question? So the flexibility with that kind of skill means they can go into any case, any area, and make a difference, discover what needs to be discovered. So it's that kind of professional creativity and willingness to learn that I think reporters just really exhibit most cleanly.
Yeah, we've talked about the Bone Valley podcast, and Gilbert King is the reporter that put that together. In talking to Gilbert on one of the Sound of Pursuit podcasts previously, it just hit me like, he's a private investigator, but he's doing it for a much broader audience. Like, he is out there doing the work of a private investigator, investigating the heck out of this case, and then reporting it. And at the end of the day, that's what we do. We go out and ask the questions, do the research, dig for the facts. I hesitate to say dig for the truth, because truth, I think, is a little bit nebulous. It's hard to get your head around, but facts, you can identify those. But there's an investigator here in Nashville, super talented, female investigator. We've been friends for a long time. We've worked together over the years. The past, I think, 3 investigators she hired, I know for sure 2 investigators she's hired, were former journalists.
Yeah. And that hits on the other point, Hal, is that just like, as you put it, that there's so much crossover there. Reporters are writing for a big audience. Investigators are writing for a smaller audience, but it's a very demanding audience. It's attorneys, very well educated. They expect, if you do an investigation, they expect a succinct, clear summary of results, not with the answer buried on page 82. They're not going to read it. They want it pretty much up front, but they also want to know all the details.
Yeah.
So that in itself, the ability to sort of produce reports quickly and clearly, and really document the investigation. You're only as good as your documentation.
Right.
That's the thing that is kind of surprising to people.
I've talked to, we go to several private investigator conferences around the country throughout the year. I was in California last year for the Cali conference. I've been to Texas several times for the Tally conference, in Florida for FALI and FAPI, and the North Carolina NCAPI, North Carolina Association of Professional Investigators, I think it is. One of the things that I really get a kick out of, there are a lot of younger, former military people that are looking at this profession. And here's the thing. Every one of them that I've talked to is like skilled, they're passionate, they want to do good work. And for those guys, a lot of times they want to do surveillance work and they're really good at
Yeah.
it. And they're young enough to get out there and sit in the car and do that thing. But it's a kick for them to get out and do surveillance work. You and I have talked several times about the surveillance work we've done. For someone wanting to get into this business that, they either grew up watching Rockford or Magnum or whatever current PI shows are out here. What is real surveillance like?
Good question. I mean, I think both of us have had a touch of real surveillance. I don't do a lot of it, never have, but I've always been closely aligned with somebody who does, because it's really one of the best combinations because of this type of civil work that I do. Is I need somebody who does a lot of surveillance, and I've had one or two really professional guys over the years that have worked with me. Um, I think you hit it on the head. I think former military guys oftentimes have that skill and they've used it and they have the discipline and the interests in sort of forensics and new technologies that are out there. There's new cameras, there's new ways to track vehicles
Mm-hmm.
legally. You can't just stick a GPS tracker on anybody's car, but in some cases, we won't go too far into that, but you can in certain cases. There's all kinds of new technology. Plate readers, can make um, finding people a little bit easier. So if people want to get into that, I think it's a kind of the same trail. You want to contact some investigative firms and offer to do some work for them, in exchange for training. I mean, it's sort of the old training model that
Yeah.
oftentimes gets people into that area.
Yeah.
And many firms have a large number of subcontractors who specialize in surveillance.
Yeah. I know several investigative companies around the country that kind of encourage former military people to apply to work for them. They give a little bit of preference to them, and I think that's great. If you're former military and you think, wow, I'd like to be a private investigator, private investigations means so many different things. Inside that bubble of private investigations, a lot of times is personal protective service, security work, that kind of work. And a lot of the ex-military folks have really strong skills in those areas and can do that kind of work. So consider if you've ever thought to yourself, man, I'd like to be a private investigator. It is good work, and it's a varied amount of work. Like you can do any number of things as a private investigator. If you're that,
Exactly.
if you're that computer geek that just loves to sit on your computer and find stuff about people, I mean, there's due diligence work, there's research, there's opposition research, for political parties, stuff like that. All of this work is good paid, legitimate private investigative work that is good work to get.
Yep. And I think that comes down to one of the questions we get asked too: is should you generalize your business or should you specialize in something? And I think on the topic that you just hit, forensics, that really is something that most of the investigators who are doing that work are highly specialized. If they're going to do, say, computer forensics, they're not going to be out doing witness interviews and public records research. They focus only on the computer research or the phone forensics or bug sweeps, that kind of thing, because there's so much good work out there for you. And quite frankly, your rates are going to be pretty high. They're going to be in the upper end of this profession, maybe upwards of $300 an hour. And it's great work. And you'll have work probably come from around the country, because I think there is that aspect of it that you need to sort of have a broad client base of investigative firms. But I have a handful of guys that I call in. One guy comes in from Florida to do bug sweeps for me. And I don't get a lot of that work, but when I do, I know he does it really well.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, the field is so broad as to almost be undefinable. There's so many areas in this PI world that you can get work in. Couple of resources I will suggest for people that would like to find out more about the private investigations business. Number one, Pursuit Magazine. Go to pursuitmag.com and read as many articles as you can. Couple things. Number one, there's really good information there. It's free. It's available to anyone. Number two, you get ideas of people to contact and ask for help to get into this business. People that write stories on Pursuit Magazine, their name is there. You can find them and reach out to them, and most of them do not mind. They may not respond immediately, but use that resource. It's there. It's available. It's free. The other thing I would say is that this is total sales pitch time, but PI Education, which owns Pursuit Magazine, is pieducation.com. We offer online asynchronous training, meaning you can go on and take it at your own pace for private investigator continuing education, but a lot of that material is appropriate for someone that just wants to get into the business. If you want to learn more about surveillance, we've got a detailed surveillance course. If you want to learn more about criminal defense, we've got a detailed criminal defense course, how to interview people, medical, legal, death investigations, any manner of different courses you could take over there at PI Education. John, I know you do work with the Innocence Project. Talk a little bit about how, young investigators that would like to get into the business, would like to learn more about it, might be helpful there.
Yeah, wrongful convictions is a growing area. It's really exploded in the last 20 years. In particular, after all the DNA cases sort of came down in the 90s, people started to realize that there were more innocent people in prison that didn't have a DNA involved in their case at all. And then it became, hey, we need private detectives to go back and uncover witness testimony and get the evidence out of people's heads and into the courtroom again. And I think the best way to get into that is to, maybe connect up with your local Innocence Project. They're actually, I think there's over 50. They're not, some states have multiple ones and some states don't have any. So you might see one state with 2 or 3. Sometimes they're privately run. Other times they're linked to a university. They are always looking for talented investigators who are willing to put in effort. You can volunteer. You might be able to work out a reduced fee, low bono, as we call it, to do some work. But they believe me, you will be welcomed with open arms. They really need investigators to delve into these cases. They're unique, and there's not enough people doing it.
Yeah. There's also kind of a network of innocence clinics at law schools around the country that help law school students training to be attorneys get their head around working on innocence cases. I know, excuse me, I know a lot of times they welcome volunteer help. It's a good way to learn about the business.
Yeah, take a look at the innocencenetwork.org. That's sort of the clearinghouse website for all these organizations. You can find a lot of information there.
So we've talked about what makes for a good private investigator. We've talked about some options for people to get into the business. I'm just going to say this right now. If you have interest in becoming a private investigator, I beg you, please check out Pursuit Magazine, read as much as you can. Send us a note. If there's any way that we can help, we'll be glad to try and help out. John and I are co-hosting this podcast. If you send notes through the Pursuit Magazine contact page, if it's a question I think John can help out with, I'll get with him. We'll talk about it. And the other thing I would say is follow the Sound of Pursuit podcast. For the next several weeks, we've got kind of a schedule of things we want to talk about. We're going to be doing them live to YouTube just the same way we did today. We'll start promoting that a little bit more once John and I get more comfortable with how this all works. But I think it'd be a really good chance for you to interact with us real time in a live setting. We can see the comments coming in on the YouTube channel and address them in a real time fashion. So join us here whenever you get a chance. John, so good to see you. Thank you again for co-hosting this with me.
Hal, great to see you. Enjoyed it again.
All right. That is the Sound of Pursuit for this week. I'm Hal Humphreys.
I'm John Nardizzi.
And now a brief shout out to our sponsors.